In keeping with his mission to spread his teachings in the most basic way possible, the Buddha taught 3 basic facts of existence. They were 1. Impermanence, 2. Suffering, and 3. Non-self. 1. Impermanence. This is a viewpoint which is foundational to Buddhist thought, although not unique to it. It is the acknowledgement of impermanence in all things. This is the idea that things are subject to change and flux with no exception. Impermanence goes on to form many other Buddhist ideas. It is used to motivate a sense of detachment and to explain our delusions which cause suffering. As discussed, delusional views can cause suffering. An example of a delusional view may be that you have a young and fit body that will last forever, and when this inevitably begins to age and change, it can cause suffering based on your wrong view that the body would be fixed to one state. By this same notion, recognition of impermanence can provide us with detachment from our delusions and a sense of ease of what is to come. Impermanence is also used to motivate our own behaviour towards a better morality or more harmonious relationships. As life is so short, why would you waste it arguing or in moral neglect? You too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel? How easily the wind overturns a frail tree. The body is merely the foam of a wave, the shadow of a shadow. It remains a fact that the fixed and necessary constitution of being, that all constituents are transitory. The Buddhist view of impermanence goes further than the orthodox Hindu schools, and the Buddhists argue that not even the non-material elements of life, such as soul or consciousness, have any fixed permanence. It could be said that Buddhism prescribes the ultimate version of impermanence. This total impermanent worldview affects all aspects of Buddhist thought, from epistemology to ontology. 2. Suffering, dukkha. Whilst effort is made here to use the best English translations and not expound on the issue, the Pali word dukkha deserves some attention. Dukkha has many potential English translations, which generally describe a negative mental state in one way or another. Suffering is a broad term to cover these, but does not deliver the nuance of the phrase. In different contexts, dukkha can be translated as unsatisfactoriness, stress, anxiety, pain, despair, separation from a loved one, or sorrow. These are all forms of dukkha. Many of the symptoms of various mental illnesses such as low mood, mania, psychosis or depression may also be described as dukkha. Both formerly and now, it is only dukkha that I describe, and the cessation of dukkha. The idea that painful mental states which involve suffering are fundamental to our existence was the basic problem of life which the Buddha wanted to solve. Rather than this being a pessimistic or unchangeable outlook on life, his teachings are an attempt at a solution. The Buddha argued that to solve the problem of suffering, we first had to acknowledge it as a basic fact of existence. We had to face the problem head on. 3. Non-self. When we come to examine the elements of being one by one, we discover in an absolute sense that there is no living entity there to form a basis for figments such as I am. The third basic fact of existence is described as non-self or anatta. As previously mentioned, the Buddha taught that all things are subject to change and are impermanent, and this includes even the concept of self. This can be difficult to grasp, especially for the Western mind, which has grown up in a society which places emphasis on the self as a concrete idea. The Buddha taught that we are made up of sensory components such as sight, smell, touch, taste, etc., and that our sense of self is the sum total of these components. But it is just that, a sense or an illusion, and not a real thing. The Buddha gave the example of a chariot, but we will use a car, to demonstrate how this concept of non-self works. His argument is that just as a car is a useful concept, it is in fact the sum total of many separate parts. This is why the idea of non-self is applicable instead of not-self. He was not denying that a car exists as a concept. It does, and it has use. But when we examine it more closely, we may realise it is in a sense an empty concept. A car, just as the idea of self, is really just a composite of many different parts. A car has seats, wheels, an engine, a boot, and a metal body. But which of these parts really is the car? Would it still be a car if each part was removed? Car is really just a useful concept to think about what is an amalgamation of parts into a functioning unit which can transport you. In the same way, the Buddha argued that self, or I am, is just a grouping together of various sensory components which form our consciousness for a limited time. We could apply the same idea on a more micro level to a single component of the car. For example, just as an engine is a useful concept, it is in fact no more than a composite of a spark, a cylinder, a valve and a piston, etc. And then each of these parts is made up of even smaller parts ad infinitum. Or we could apply this at a more macro level. For example, a traffic jam is really just a useful way of thinking about what is a mass of different cars. The Buddha argued that the idea of self is similar in this sense to that of a chariot or a car. Yes, we do experience our current self as one cohesive unity, and it has value and merit in that sense. However, it is really just a temporary coming together of our senses and faculties, which can be broken down into constituent parts. His teaching was a bold step away from the concept of Atman or self in the orthodox Hindu schools, and left the Buddhists with a problem of how they could argue on the one hand that karma continues between lifetimes, and on the other that there is no solid or permanent self for that karma to be bound to. This problem occupies a back and forth between Hindu and Buddhist scholars to this day, and is still one of the key differences between these two philosophies. It is also worth noting that the Buddha regarded the notion of self, other, and self-identification as associated with attachment and clinging, which, as discussed above, are forms of suffering. This has been an excerpt from my book, Eastern Philosophy, a Handbook for Beginners. More information and download link in the bio below. Thanks for listening.